Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Thomas Dimitrovich, and this is another IAEI News Live. As you can tell, I'm traveling. I'm in another hotel room. I don't know when it's going to stop. But in any case, the show must go on. So I thought I would use this session. This is a recorded session. I'm using this session. I just had another question on what I thought was clearly defined and clearly answered, but I am getting more questions about the background behind the removal of the removal of the requirement turned into an option for the receptacle on peninsulas and islands. So let's talk about the whys with regard to the changes that we saw in the 2023 code cycle with regard to 210.52c, islands and peninsulas, the optional receptacle. All right, so where do I start? I'm going to start, I'll give you some background. Remember in the 2020 code cycle, we expanded the requirement for islands and peninsulas. We went to a square footage calculation. We mandated at least one within 2 feet of the end of the island or peninsula. And then we came up with the square footage, and basically we said, look, for every so many square foot, you need to put a receptacle, and we don't care where you put it. So that was where we were in the 2020 code. After the 2020 code, I was sent pictures, and I'll never forget, I was down in Texas at the Texas chapter of the Independent Electrical Contractors Association. I was there to do, I think, a presentation or participate in a program. There were, as soon as I walked through the front door, I got a, hey, Tom, come here. And I went into this office, and there were a few inspectors and a few contractors looking at some drawings. And they had a code book. And they said, we want to understand the requirement that we put in 210.52. Now, remember what we did at that time was we did the measurements, and we mandated a receptacle outlet. So the requirement was for a receptacle outlet, and if you needed four receptacle outlets. So what was presented to me in that little session was my first taste of what was to come. The first thing I was presented with was a picture in an island, which was one long multi-gang box, and in there was like 5 or 6 receptacles. And the first question I had was, does this meet the code requirement, meaning like 6 receptacles in one box? And my answer to that was, well, no. And the reason was because the language said for every so many feet you need a receptacle outlet. And an outlet is a defined term. I'm going to call up the language from the 2020 code, and you know what I'm going to use? I'm going to use my NFPA link. I get to log in. When you first go into NFPA Link, you will be prompted to log in, and then you can select the code edition that you want, and then what you can do is down at the bottom you can change editions. So if I go to the 2020 code and I go to 210.52, and I'm going to need my spectacles for this one. You probably have got to yours faster than I did. All right, if you look at 210.52 Charlie, it says islands and peninsulas, at least one receptacle outlet shall be provided for the first 9 square foot or fraction thereof of the countertop or work surface. A receptacle outlet shall be provided for every additional 18 square foot or fraction thereof of the countertop or work surface. At least one receptacle outlet shall be located within 2 feet of the outer end of a peninsula. So then the question is, what constitutes a receptacle outlet, right? So if we go back to the definition of what an outlet is, and I know this is going to get some of you. No, we're going to go to receptacle outlet. Now it says an outlet, for the definition of a receptacle outlet, is an outlet where one or more receptacles are installed. One or more receptacles. So a duplex is 2. Now let's take a look at what an outlet is. A point on the wiring system at which current is taken to supply utilization equipment. So the question was, do I need an individual box for each receptacle? Duplex. And we could have the debate on whether or not you needed that, but the bottom line was they were putting all 6 right daggone smack next to them, to each other, at the end of the island. And so it sort of defeated the purpose. What they were supposed to do was place all of those receptacle outlets in various locations on the island to give you access. Instead, they put all 6 duplexes, which would have been 12 receptacles, all on the end. So that's the behavior that the language in the 2020 code stimulated. So we knew we needed to make a change. Either we were going to specifically tell you exactly where you needed to put the receptacle outlets, or we were going to do something. I don't know. Now, in the interim, we had a public input. In the interim, there was a task group that was formulated after the 2020 code, because towards the end of those debates and discussions, we were made aware of data from the Consumer Product Safety Commission that basically said, look, we're putting more receptacles on these islands and peninsulas, and we have an alarming rate of children and others who are pulling these appliances off of the countertops. And I'll give you some examples. This is from the NEIS data. Here's 2004. An 18-month-old male received scald burns to 11% of his body, including his face, neck, and upper body, when he pulled on a crock pot's electric cord while standing on a toddler step trying to get a drink from a drinking bottle. The victim's mother was in the living room when the incident occurred. Another one. A girl, age 2, was hospitalized for burns when hot beans spilled on her while pulling a slow cooker cord. Here's another one. A 1-year-old boy suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns when a slow cooker with hot water spilled on him. He was hospitalized. Here's another one. A 2-year-old boy received third-degree burns on 80% of his body when a slow cooker of scalding liquid on the dining table toppled over him. So this was a dining room table. So what we did was we went through each of these CPSC data and we looked which ones could you account for that are in the kitchen, which ones are like this last one, which has nothing to do with the kitchen. This was on a dining room table topper. It says dining table. I'm assuming a dining room table. So there were a lot of information. There was a lot of information provided by the Consumer Product Safety Commission that basically provided evidence. So we said, you know, what we're going to do is create a task group, and the task group is going to look at what the options are and look at the data. So I was on that task group, and so in the process of looking through this, I did some homework. I wanted to find out when was the first receptacle required on a peninsula or island. And I went back to the 1990 code cycle. In the 1990 edition of the code is where we first saw the introduction of receptacle requirements for islands and peninsulas. You can go back to the 86 code, 87? I think it was 86. Anyway, and you can see there was no requirement in the 210.52. Now, at this time, we are seeing, just from a technology perspective, we're seeing an introduction of appliances now that have more electronics in them. So we have microwaves and toasters, etc., that have a clock on them. And that means they have to be powered all the time. So now you have these these appliances that are being placed in the kitchen on those countertops, and they're taking up a receptacle 100% of the time, 24/7, 365. It's not like you're going to unplug the toaster and plug something else in, and then when you plug the toaster back in again, now you got to put the date code in and everything else and the time. So there was a public input from Frank Kitsen, whatever, from NEMA. His recommendation was, the recommendation from NEMA was to revise the first sentence of 210.52b by adding "and located so that no point along the counter space is more than 24 inches measured horizontally from a receptacle outlet." So a countertop space, what they were seeking was no more than 24 inches at any point on a countertop, which would include islands and peninsulas. There should be no point that is more than 24 inches from a receptacle outlet. So, and the substantiation that was used was that an ever-increasing number of electrical appliances are requiring dedicated outlet receptacles for full-time power. Programmable coffee makers, radios, and microwave ovens require power full-time in order to operate a clock circuit and a memory circuit for programs. This means that some outlets are no longer available for the temporary use of portable mixers, can openers, electric knives, blenders, toasters, waffle irons, fry pans, etc. The requirement for more dedicated outlets promotes the use of cube taps and other multiple outlet adapters. It could be a translation there. Since more countertop outlets are now required, the NEC must keep pace with new technology. Many portable appliances are now supplied with 18-inch cords, which would also make this change desirable. So there was only one negative vote, and the negative vote was I can't remember. It was not what you may think, but in any case, if we go back to, in fact, let's go back. Let's go to, where's Adobe? Bum, 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 bum. So all of this history data is available online. You don't have to go far to get the information. Just go out to nfpa.org/70, select the year, which would be 1990, and then you can go and you can see the public inputs and public comments. So if we go to public inputs, this would have been public input number 2-120. So if you search the PDF for 2-120, we should, there it is, 210.52. The one negative vote, Cunningham, the code panel accepted this proposal with the understanding that this would result in a maximum distance between countertop receptacle outlets of 48 inches. However, a close examination of the wording could lead to an interpretation that the 24 inches could be a radius from the receptacle outlet. This would make it impossible for space on a counter deeper than 24 inches to comply unless surface-mounted receptacles are installed. He's voting against the panel action because the wording could be interpreted to require more receptacles than the panel and perhaps the proposer initially intended. And that was Cunningham. Cunningham. Oh, there were three people that voted against it. Cunningham, Rayo, and Vaughan. Rayo just says the proposed wording is not clear. And then Vaughan, as a volume electrical contractor having installed 4 or more duplex receptacles constituting 8 or more receptacles on, and blah, 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 blah. So his concern was the cost of the additional receptacles. So what you had was you had the public input. Then language was changed. It was accepted. The first draft was accepted, and the panel action was to accept the proposal, except the first sentence, which has been modified by the panel. Okay, so what they ended up with was in 210-52B, countertops. In kitchen and dining areas of dwelling units, a receptacle outlet shall be installed at each counter space 12 inches or wider. Countertop spaces separated by ranges tops, refrigerators, or sinks shall be considered as separate countertop spaces. Receptacles rendered inaccessible by appliances fastened in place or appliances occupying dedicated space shall not be considered as these required outlets. Well, that was accepted in principle, but that wasn't the change. That was 2-119. Here's what they, here's what they actually submitted for public input 2-120. Revise the first sentence by adding, and located so that no point along the counter space is more than 24 inches measured horizontally from a receptacle outlet, and it was accepted. So now, as you can imagine, with those negative comments, if you go to the report on comments for that same code cycle, you'll see there were a few comments made. One was to revise the section, in kitchens and dining areas of dwelling units, a receptacle outlet shall be installed at each counter space wider than 12 inches. Receptacles shall be installed that no point along the wall line is more than 24 inches measured horizontally from a receptacle outlet in that space. Island and peninsula countertops 12 inches or wider shall have at least one receptacle for each 4 feet of countertop. And that was accepted. Now, the substantiation for that was, the substantiation for the proposal makes a lot of sense, as do Mr. Cunningham's comments. Perhaps the suggested changes are not generally left connected, would be satisfactory. Island and peninsula countertops create problems of their own when it comes to receptacles. Appliances are not generally left connected at these areas anyway. A lot of islands are built with cabinet doors and drawers on all sides, and some are angled so that it is almost impossible to locate receptacles in them. Mr. Vaughn's comments are very confusing to me. First he tells us blah, 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 blah. So, the first draft was looking for no point on any countertop greater than 24 inches from a receptacle. It appeared problematic. This gentleman said, let's base the measurement from the wall, and let's put a requirement in for islands and peninsulas because they're a special case. Nowhere in this entire discussion are we talking about extension cord use. There's no data on people tripping on cords. It was driven, their initial drive was because of these appliances that have built-in clocks, and the concern that we didn't have enough receptacles because some of them were being dedicated to specific appliances. We aren't talking about trip statistics or limiting the use of extension cords. Nowhere in the vocabulary of any of these public inputs or public comments or substantiation or panel statements are we mentioning anything about extension cords. Okay? The next one was Fred Hartwell wanted to put a reject in. This is public comment 2-677. Oh, it was rejected. He would recommend a accept in principle with rewording. His suggestion was saying, and located so that no point along a counter space against a wall is more than 36 inches measuring along that wall from a receptacle outlet. That takes out the islands and peninsulas altogether. So Mr. Hartwell's approach was we don't even need to address countertops and peninsulas or peninsulas and islands because we can get this done just by mandating the required measurement from the wall. And he says his substantiation was the proposal is excessive in that most appliance cords are at least 3 feet long, 36 inches, and there is great difficulty gaining popular acceptance of even the present requirement for over 12-inch counters. Applying this rule to islands and peninsulas is going to create, it seems, a plethora of state rules to limit this application on these areas, especially when the public finds out that tombstone outlets or similar are required on the larger surfaces. The IAEI sanctioned proposal 2-125 uses the 3-foot distance. This comment incorporates that idea, but only on counters against walls. So Fred is like, hey, I'm agreeing with the IAEI's public proposal, public input in 2-125, and I'm making some modifications. And that was rejected. All right, so now that is all in the 1990 code, and now you had a requirement for a receptacle, a single receptacle on an island and peninsula. There, again, no mention of extension cord use, okay? Now, it was all to keep up with digital technology. So now let's take it to the 93 code. In 1993, public input 2-222 was put in by the IAEI. Their recommendation was receptacles required to serve peninsula and island countertops shall not be located below the level of the countertop. This is an important one. The substantiation was electrical cords from kitchen appliances extending over the end, OMG, of the countertop exposed children to a hazardous condition. Children pulling on a cord can pull hot coffee pots, skillets, etc. over the counter edge and onto themselves. The panel action was to reject. The statement was too restrictive. Incomplete technical substantiation to support the proposed change. Carpenter, this would be Jim Carpenter from IEI, said many manufacturers of kitchen appliances have included warnings on their products or in their literature concerning the hazards of placing an appliance too close to the counter edge, letting the cord extend over the counter edge because of the hazard described in this proposal. Permitting receptacles below the level of the countertop promotes the misuse of these appliances. Now, Jim Carpenter did not the IEI's presentation didn't have statistics. Everything that they're talking about, and one of the reasons why it was rejected, they said there was no data. There was no technical substantiation to support the proposed change. The fact that all of these manufacturers were putting these labels on saying, hey, you don't want to put them close to the edge, there was no, hey, CPSC data showing statistics yet, because it had just gone into the code to mandate this receptacle below the countertop on islands and peninsulas. Now, fast forward to the 96 code cycle. The battle's not over yet. Dave Bushover, Laurel Springs, New Jersey, says delete the second paragraph completely from a receptacle outlet shall be installed at each island, measured measured from the connecting edge. His substantiation was cords hanging over the edge of a counter present an immense hazard to young children. The majority of kitchen appliances are electric heat type, i.e. electric fry pans, and lightweight enough to be pulled off with 2-foot cords and no edges on the counters. These appliances may very well land on a child. Deleting may very well land. They're not saying they are. They're not saying there's reported cases. They're saying, look, I'm recognizing this hazard. You could pull this thing, somebody can pull these appliances off with the cords hanging over the edge. He says, deleting the receptacles, thus saving a child from boiling grease, far outweighs the luxury mandated by this section of the code. I can't make this stuff up. The panel action was accepted principle. They deleted the second paragraph, they deleted the fine print note, and added the following text. If a receptacle is installed below the countertop surface to meet the requirements of this section, the receptacle shall not be more than 12 inches below the countertop surface. So what they do, they kept it up higher, closer to the countertop, and my gut would tell me. Man, this is just dawned on me now. What we always would say is, well, that'd be the 12 inches is because that's the length of the cord. No, they changed that length because they wanted to keep it a little bit higher off the ground from kids. That was the reason why. There was nothing in there that said in the panel statement that the reason they did the 12 inches was because of the length of the cords or anything like that. They just said the receptacle shall not be more than 12 inches below the countertop surface. The panel statement was, the panel agrees with the submitter's substantiation to delete the requirements for receptacles to be installed at island and peninsula countertops. The safety considerations given to this panel outweigh the requirements to have receptacles installed in these spaces. The fine print note was deleted as it was no longer needed for clarification. The addition of the last sentence was necessary to define the location of receptacles that may be installed below the countertop. All right, so that's how you got the 12 inches. The 12 inches was there because first they said, we're going to take the mandate away and we're going to put these receptacles, if it's there to serve the countertop, if you put it there, then it needs to be within 12 inches, which puts it up closer to the countertop height, which takes it further away from kids. In the report on comments, The NEC has recognized this is a reject of the proposal. The NEC has recognized, and this was accepted in principle. The NEC, this is public comment 2-117. The public input was 2-270. This one says, the NEC has recognized and required that safety outlets should be installed where needed to reduce the use of extension cords. Now we got extension cords coming into the picture. To remove the required outlets on island countertops is completely inconsistent. For safety, there should be at least one pedestal on each countertop for the user so that the extension cords are not needed. It was accepted in principle, and there was a statement to see the action on 2-137. So this is the first time. This is in the, what is this? The 96 code. So it's been, this receptacle has been required in the code for 6 years. All of a sudden it's going to be taken away because of the issue with kids and the concern with kids. And now there's no substantiation from the submitters saying that extension cords are being used because there's already a receptacle there, right? We went to this whole concept of extension cords out of the blue. No data, no supporting information. The other public comment, 2-137, which was put in by Robert McCullough out of Ocean County Construction Inspection Department in New Jersey. Retain the second paragraph and fine print note and revise as follows. A minimum of one receptacle outlet shall be installed at each island countertop with a long dimension of 24 inches or greater and a shorter dimension of 12 inches or greater. Receptacle outlets to serve Peninsula countertops shall be installed so that no point along the center line of the long dimension, blah, 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 blah. You know the language. And they put the fine print note in. Now, this was accepted in principle. The substantiation was, the panel action on this proposal takes a giant step backward, meaning the removal. Given the expanding use of electrical appliances, there has been much talk about possible safety hazards from hanging cords and children pulling appliances down, but little, if any, hard evidence of this occurring. Basically saying, show me the body count. Show me where people are getting burned. I don't feel that requiring a minimum number of outlets for countertops is a luxury. The submitted revision to this section represents a good compromise between the 93 NEC and the concerns of the submitter. Based on the panel action, there are a number of dwelling units in my jurisdiction that would not have to have any countertop outlets installed by code requirements, given their counter sizes and layout. An example is a small kitchen with an 11-inch counter on each side of the sink with an island counter for the workstation. This layout would require no countertop outlets. Granted, no one would do such an installation, but the fact remains that no outlets would be mandated. I don't believe this is what the panel intended. This layout would require, granted, no one would do such an installation. Why would you give an example of an installation that no one would do as a substantiation for, anyway? The panel action was to accept in principle, revise, as noted, countertops. They added wall counter spaces, they had island counter spaces, peninsula counter spaces, etc., etc. The panel statement was the panel is in agreement with this submitter and others supporting the necessity of having a receptacle on an island and peninsula countertop to avoid the use of extension cords. Now all of a sudden we got extension cords in here. They want to avoid the use of extension cords. They had no data for the draping over of cords over the edge where they wanted to remove it because they said kids could pull crock pots and whatnot over. They said, you don't have any data, so we can't remove it. But we sure as heck can put it on with absolutely no data on on the use of extension cords. The panel action on this proposal will accomplish three objectives. One, the section will require at least one receptacle outlet for an island or peninsula. Only the outlet will be required, blah, blah, blah. The basic text, so they go through these. Now, there was, everybody agreed to it. There was a I love this stuff. You gotta love this. There was another submitter, 210-52C, to reject it. Accept proposal, new wording. Receptacle outlets shall not be installed below the level of the countertop work surface in a kitchen or dining area. This substantiation was, a step in the right direction is the panel action 1 and 2 for proposal 2-270. Now is the time to take the final step by prohibiting receptacles to be located below the countertop in kitchen and dining areas. No fewer than 17 proposals in the 96 ROP cite the hazard to children of cords draped over the counter edge. Years ago, when the only receptacles were in the wall above the countertop, the short cords for kitchen appliances were developed in part to eliminate the hazard to children. The permission to install receptacles below the countertop is a step backwards. Oh, what a step backwards it was. You've got to love this stuff. Then, you gotta love this. Ken Calhoun, Electrical Subcommittee of the Regional Codes Coordinating Committee. His recommendation was either leave 210.52C intact from the 93 NEC to the 96 or delete paragraph 2 as proposal 2-270 and add a closing sentence that reads, receptacles installed in the kitchen to serve countertop spaces shall not be installed below the countertop surface. His substantiation, although there is a basic truth to the substantiation of 2-270, there are no accident reports, thankfully, to support a declaration of immense hazard. If the panel believes this hazard exists, then receptacles should be prohibited below the countertop surface, even along wall counters. It should be remembered that each receptacle eliminated opens the door for an extension cord use, especially with the short corded kitchen appliances. You have to love this. Mike Curry then weighed in on this in 2-141. We support this proposal to eliminate island and peninsula required outlets. It's long overdue because of the hazard caused from the cords hanging over the tops. We're glad it's out of the code. Good job. And it was rejected. Gary Bowden Homes. This proposal should be accepted. Many customers have voiced this same concern. This is 2-142. It was rejected. Then 2-143. John Schultz, Minnesota Board of Electricity. A comment on proposal number 2-270. He wants to add this text. A receptacle outlet shall be installed at each island or peninsula countertop with a long dimension, blah, blah, blah. Receptacle outlets shall be installed within 2 feet from the other end. A peninsula countertop is measured from the connecting edge. He says these countertops are work surface spaces with equal standing as wall countertops. To completely eliminate the receptacle outlet requirement is not reasonable. The use of safety with regard to cords hanging over the edge of these countertops is greatly diminished, as these outlets are generally used for handheld appliances. Oh my goodness. Don Gannier, we know him. He says the panel should accept this proposal. This is 2-289. The hazard exists anytime a receptacle intended to serve a countertop is installed below the countertop. At least 10 other proposals call for this same change. Appliances plugged into receptacles below the countertop present a serious hazard to small children. Panel action on proposal 2-270 was a step in the right direction, but it does not go far enough to resolve this serious safety issue, and it was rejected. I could go on and on and on. We have a lot. I have a few others here, but you get the point. So now, fast forward to 2020, where we increased the number of receptacles, and then the Consumer Product Safety Commission brought data to the table. Data in the form of kids who were pulling fryers, deep fryers, crock pots, boiling water pots onto themselves, scalding them on their body, going to the hospital, and being scarred for the remainder of their life. In many cases, I couldn't find deaths due to this. Not that they don't exist, I just didn't see any evidence of that. Similar to the tamper-resistant receptacle arguments that were made back in the day. So all of those individuals who said this is a potential problem, this could happen, it did happen. We never had one piece of data that said anything about extension cords. In fact, the extension cord comments came up after the receptacles were already required on the islands and peninsulas. And it was used as an argument to defeat those who were wanting to remove the receptacle from islands and peninsulas, without any substantiation whatsoever. Because they wouldn't have had it, because they had a receptacle already required, which was driven not by the use of extension cords, but by the expanded use or the expanded presence of things like clocks and timers in appliances. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission information came to the table, recognizing that we have now statistics of children and others being hurt because they are pulling on those cords. I asked Doug Lee about that data. I said, Doug, now Doug Lee is with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. He's on panel 2, and he was on the task group. I asked Doug to do some more homework. I said, Doug, can you, all of the data that he brought to the table was in the mid-90s and beyond. I asked him, I says, can you find any data before 1990? Because that's when that receptacle was put on the island and peninsula. And he went back and he came back and said he could not find any data that was before 1990. So we have all this data post requiring the receptacle on an island and peninsula. No data of these damages. In fact, there wasn't even anything in any of the public inputs or comments that were speaking against it, that wanted to remove the receptacle. Their comments were, this could happen, not this is happening, okay? So that leads me to conclude, in my opinion, that placing that receptacle below the countertop on islands and peninsulas created a hazard. Just like all of these public inputs and public comments who sought to prohibit that location from having a receptacle, just like what they said would happen, did happen. There are times when people make mistakes. There are times when committees make mistakes, and I think this is one of those times. It's a big mistake. Data did not drive the requirement. The increase of receptacles on countertops and the walls, absolutely justified. We all know we have these appliances continuously plugged in. They take up a receptacle because of the clock, etc. Coffee pots have them. Microwaves have them. I got a toaster that has it. I get it. But islands and peninsulas, we've learned the hard way that that's a hazard that we need to avoid. So in the 2023 code cycle, we made it optional. That's how we got there. We didn't get there because somebody had this thing out against a receptacle. No one had the desire. No one had the desire to just reduce the cost. It wasn't a home builders association or some other type of organization that just wanted to reduce the cost of dwelling units. This is a real hazard. It has history. It wasn't created from thin air. There was a lot of arguing, a lot of debating. There was a lot of data presented to the code making panel when we made that decision. And I would say that the code panel members, when they made that decision, realized, wow, this is needed. We didn't like it. Do we want a receptacle out there on that island and peninsula? It would be great. But we don't put a receptacle in locations where we create statistics in the wrong direction of safety. So I think, in my opinion, we made the right decision It was a hard decision to make, but it was the right call. I'm just surprised at states that still want that receptacle out there, in spite of the data, in spite of the evidence that it created a problem. We can call it the gene pool, but people don't die. They are scarred for the rest of their life. At one annual meeting, 2 people stood up to the microphone and said they have scars on their body from pulling grease or whatever off of a countertop. It happens. It has happened. We have statistics that demonstrate it has happened. So that's the story. And I wanted to make sure that I got this down. I referenced numbers, and I have a Word document. If somebody wants it, I will be more than happy to share it. I don't have the Excel spreadsheet from the Consumer Product Safety Commission, but that's easy to get. Hopefully, you got the rest of the story. And I hope that you may or may not agree with the decision. You may think it's just a bunch of bullcrap. And that's your opinion, and you're entitled to it. It's the United States of America. So my suggestion would be do your homework. Believe half of what you hear and less of what you see until you dig into it yourself. If you're in a position where you are trying to make a decision, or you are on a committee that is going to be a part of a code adoption process, and you're going to have to, and you're looking at possible changes around this area, don't do it blindly. Don't base your decision on things that have not occurred. The use of extension cords, show me the problem. Show me the statistics. I can show you statistics of children and others and adults who have pulled crock pots, grease pots, etc. off of countertops. They are not pretty. If you read through them, it will curl your hair. All right? So hopefully, if there's anything if there's anything that I delivered to you today that you can walk away with, is do your homework, do your research before you make a decision. Go in eyes wide open. It's the least you could do. All right, thank you. And hopefully you got something out of this session. I really apologize for not being able to be live. Take care and stay safe, and please stay healthy. See you next week.